Raise hail, y'all. We're gonna talk about money today, but not stadium money, not some contract so big it breaks the whole scale of what's possible. We're talking $2 million. 2 million, a number that in today's NFL is basically the price of dinner for four at a nice steakhouse out in Ashburn, and that number is about to become the quietest heist of the whole 2026 season for the Commanders. And that's not all I've got today. There's a new piece in Durante Jones's defense that nobody was watching back in the spring, and now it's starting to sound like the key to the whole scheme. And to close things out, two players born out of that exact same defensive system change are fighting for space. One with a legendary college resume, and one that nobody remembers from last year's draft. Listen, there's a lot to unpack today. Let's get into it. Okay fam, I need you fully locked in right here, because this is exactly the kind of move that separates good general managers from great ones. When Adam Peters made his big offseason signings, everybody talked about the loud pieces, everybody talked about the names that generate trending topics. But there was one signing that flew completely under the radar, and that signing's name is Rachaad White. Let's put this in context, because you gotta understand where this player's coming from to understand why this has me so hyped. White spent 4 years in Tampa Bay producing in a way that honestly a lot of fans around the league never even clocked. He wasn't a filler player. He was a dual threat back, capable of running between the tackles and also being a real weapon in the passing game, something that in a modern offense is worth its weight in gold. White's problem in Tampa was simple. He landed behind Bucky Irving in the touch hierarchy, and in the NFL, when you've got two quality backs competing for the same ball, somebody's waiting their turn. That's exactly what happened to him, and this is where the part that, as an analyst and as a fan, I think is the smartest move of the whole Washington offseason comes in. Peters didn't just bring in White for his production. He brought him in because there's a prior connection with Jaden Daniels, and look, I could be wrong, but I think that factor weighed heavier than people realize in the final decision. When you've got a young quarterback still building trust with the pieces around him, adding a back who already has a working relationship with him is not a small detail. That's pure strategy. That's removing friction from your franchise quarterback's learning curve. Now, the number that genuinely leaves me speechless is the contract, $2 million. Think about that, fam. In a league where a mediocre second-tier running back can command double or triple that just for roster presence, the Commanders landed a player with a 1,000-yard scrimmage resume for the price of a random role player. Josh Crisler, who covers the Buccaneers for the Pewter Plank, said it with a clarity I loved hearing. He said White is in prime position to take on the workload he's always wanted, and that he could very well eclipse 1,000 yards from scrimmage again, something he already did twice in Tampa Bay. And he added that for a mere $2 million, White could end up being the biggest steal of free agency and one of the best values in the entire NFL in 2026. Listen to that again. That's not a Washington insider hyping up his own team's signing. That's somebody who covered this player for 4 years in Tampa, who knows his strengths and his limits better than almost anyone in the country, saying publicly that Washington found gold for the price of bronze. And this isn't just empty off-season hype either. There are real signs this is translating onto the field. New offensive coordinator David Blouse is building a backfield by committee. Gotta be honest about that. Jackery Krosky Merritt is still very much in the equation, and he's gonna get his opportunities. But everything I'm hearing out of spring practice points to White having the profile, the vision, and the experience to be the focal point of that committee, not just a complimentary piece. And there's an extra factor here that matters a ton. White's playing for another contract. This is a contract year for him, and those are exactly the years where you see NFL players pull out a superior version of themselves. The motivation of locking in that next big check is real, and in White's case, it's combining with the perfect opportunity in the right system with the right quarterback. I'm gonna be direct with my opinion here, because that's what these videos are for. I believe Rachaad White finishes the 2026 season getting mentioned in the same conversations as the best low-cost signings in the entire league, not just the Commanders. And I believe that if that happens, the same Adam Peters who got this for $2 million is gonna have to open up the checkbook in 2027 to keep him, because the market's gonna reflect exactly what Josh Crisler is already seeing out of Tampa. The practice reports confirm the coaching staff is impressed with what he's shown so far, and that Daniels trusts him fully, that for a back who basically came in for free is the definition of finding value where nobody else was looking. I could be wrong. Listen, there's always risk with any offseason projection, but when the analysis comes from somebody who watched this player up close for 4 seasons, and when that analysis lines up with what's being reported out of Ashburn, I'll take the accumulated evidence over automatic skepticism every time. This is the kind of quiet signing that come January, when we're all talking about who had the best offseason in the NFC East, people are gonna remember as the move nobody saw coming. Okay, bro? That's the first big plate of the day. But hold up, because what's coming next on defense is building something that could completely change this team's identity. Fam, this offseason was a full-on revolution for the Commanders' defense, and we were all focused, rightfully so, on the big names. But one team insider put the spotlight on something different, and once I finished reading what he said, I understood why this deserves its own space today. Let's break this down. Durante Jones coming in as the new defensive coordinator. We already covered that here a while back, and I still think it's one of the most underrated hires of the year across this entire organization. But among the defensive signings of the offseason, one got completely overshadowed by the noise of the bigger names, the arrival of Nick Cross. And this is where ESPN insider John Keim's analysis gets genuinely interesting. Keim had already named Cross as the most underrated move of the whole Washington roster, and this week he went deeper into why. He explained that Durante Jones' system, if Jones copies what he did in Minnesota as pass game coordinator, calls for a lot of safety involvement and specifically needs one who's versatile. In Minnesota, that role belonged to Josh Metellus, a player who was constantly moved around the field based on what the opposing offense showed. For Washington, Keim was direct. That guy is going to be Nick Cross. Let me explain why this matters tactically and isn't just a cute little note. A scheme where the safety is constantly moving, playing near the line, one down, and then dropping back 20 yards the next is a scheme built to generate disguise, to hide the defense's real intentions until the last possible second before the snap. That messes with the opposing quarterback's reads. That breaks up route timing. And for that scheme to work, you need an athlete with the physical range and the football IQ to execute that constant movement without losing gap integrity or blowing an assignment. Based on what Keim's describing, Cross has exactly that profile, and he was just a little hidden during spring practices before his real importance becomes obvious once fall hits. Now, let's get to the contract numbers, because this reinforces the whole value argument. Cross signed a 2-year, $13 million deal total with a $3 million signing bonus and $6.05 million guaranteed. For a safety expected to be a legitimate #1 option in Washington's secondary, that's a cheap contract. Extremely cheap. And this connects directly to what we just talked about with White, bro. Adam Peters is finding value in spots where other GMs simply aren't looking closely enough. But let's be honest with the full analysis, because I didn't come here to run a Nick Cross commercial. Cross was among the league's best run-stopping safeties in 2025. That's confirmed and it's real. But he's also had occasional fragility in coverage, and that needs to be said with full clarity. Finding the right balance between those two sides is gonna be key, and a lot of that responsibility falls directly on Durante Jones and how he designs Cross's usage within the scheme. And this brings me to a point I want to hammer home. Jones got this job in large part because of his track record developing defensive backs. He's not a coordinator walking in without a resume in this specific area, it's literally his specialty. The fact that the possibility of developing a player like Cross, a former Maryland star, got Jones's seal of approval from the moment he was hired, and considering how little else Washington did to reinforce the safety position this offseason, a big role for Cross is basically guaranteed. My personal take is this: not every Adam Peters move is going to pay off the way he hopes. That's mathematically impossible in the NFL. No GM bats 1,000. But Cross feels like a safe bet within that margin of risk to me. And if Jones manages to unlock even more out of what we already saw in 2025, that's gonna hugely boost the potential for a full defensive resurgence in Washington. We're talking about a piece that could go from being a solid run defending safety to being the central axis of a whole disguise-based defensive scheme. That to me is the difference between a good signing and an actual heist. Okay fam, take a breath with me for a second, because what's coming next is different. We're going to talk about two players who came directly out of this exact same Durante Jones defensive revolution, and the question that interests me isn't just who's playing well, it's who actually finds real space on a roster that suddenly got crowded in the same part of the field. Let's close out with two stories that seem minor at first glance, but together tell the real story of what's happening inside Washington's defensive locker room this summer, the brutal competition for space that a full scheme change creates. Let's start with Mike Sainristil, because his situation is fascinating and complicated at the same time. This guy came out of Michigan with a massive reputation. Nick Saban himself called him the best football player, pound for pound, in the entire 2024 draft class. That's not a phrase you throw around lightly, fam. Coming from Saban, that's almost a papal seal of approval. And in his second season, Sainristil produced 4 interceptions, 12 passes defensed, over 1,000 snaps played, sliding between the slot and the outside depending on what the game plan called for. For a defense that spent a good chunk of 2025 searching for answers, that ball production was real and it mattered. But, and here's where I gotta be honest with you, even if it stings a little, the PFF numbers tell a different story. Sainristil allowed 67 receptions on 94 targets last season. That's 71.3% completion for opposing quarterbacks when they targeted him directly. He allowed 767 yards and 9 touchdowns. His overall PFF grade was 52.7, and his specific coverage grade was 52.1. That doesn't erase the interceptions, but it gives them real context. And this is exactly what makes his situation in 2026 so interesting to break down. Washington reinforced the cornerback room calmly, but with real intention all offseason. They brought in Amik Robertson, who brings experience and attitude and also gives the coaches more confidence to move Sainristil into other roles when needed. They brought in Rasul Douglas, who brings size and much needed veteran presence this roster was missing. And they've also got Trey Amos, another young option with real upside. Sainristil's versatility remains his biggest asset. He can play inside naturally and comfortably, he can slide outside without losing much in the transition, and he gives the staff the ability to disguise their coverage packages without the whole plan falling apart if they move him around. But with so much new depth competing for that same part of the field, his specific role for 2026 still isn't fully settled, and that's the uncomfortable truth that has to be accepted. My take on Sainristil is simple. He's not the finished answer at cornerback for Washington yet, and he shouldn't be treated like one. But he's one of the most useful defensive backs on this roster, and someone who's gonna benefit enormously the day the staff finally locks in exactly where he fits best within this new scheme. Now, let's switch positions and talk about somebody completely different. Kane Medrano. And bro, this is exactly the kind of forgotten story I love digging up on this channel. Washington selected 5 players in the 2025 draft. 4 of them found clear roles in year 1. Josh Connerly Jr. on the offensive line, Trey Amos in the secondary, Jackery Kroski-Merritt in the backfield, and Jalen Lane as a punt returner. But the 5th, Kane Medrano, a 6th-round linebacker out of UCLA, didn't play a single snap outside of special teams his entire rookie season. 0, nothing. A complete ghost within the defensive attack. And this is exactly the kind of player that every summer generates that quiet buzz among the people who follow the team closely. The second-year sleeper nobody remembers until suddenly he's showing up in every practice report. This summer, that name is Medrano. Medrano's speed and athleticism give him a legitimate defensive ceiling, especially considering Washington's fully embracing a youth movement on that side of the ball under Durante Jones. But, and this is key, carving out a real role in 2026 is going to be a huge challenge. Washington's linebacker room is as crowded as it's been in recent team history. Sonny Styles, the number 7 overall pick from the most recent draft, Leo Chenal, a free agency addition, and returning veterans Frankie Louvu and Jordan Magee. And that's not even counting that in Jones's new 3-4 style scheme, Washington's edge rushers effectively become linebackers too. That means Dorrance Armstrong Jr., Odafe Owe, Kelevon Chason, and Charles Omenihu are also fighting for space in that same second level of the defense. With that much traffic at the position, where does Medrano fit in? Here's the detail I find most interesting in this whole story. The presence of Nick Bellore, the veteran special teams specialist, can't be ignored either. Medrano's most realistic path onto the final 53-man roster might be directly as his replacement in special teams coverage. That would give him a foot in the door, with potential to expand from there if the performance backs it up. With 4 linebackers on the field on almost every snap under this new scheme, there should be real opportunities for Medrano to find a spot as a trusted backup. He's gonna need to show out hard during the preseason, and if he does, there might be no turning back for him. My personal take on Medrano is this: he was drafted as a raw project with outstanding athleticism, and now is the moment where that long-term gamble has to start paying real dividends. Based on everything I'm seeing out of training camp, he's done absolutely everything right so far. People have treated him like a footnote on this roster. And fam, I'm telling you, don't count him out yet. This team might have a breakout candidate who ends up shocking everybody. What connects Saint Ristil and Medrano is the same underlying truth. Durante Jones didn't just show up to change Washington's defensive philosophy on paper. He showed up to create real competition for space, one where the talent accumulated over the last 2 drafts finally has to prove on the field what it promised on paper. And that competition, for us as fans, is exactly the kind of summer drama that makes every practice report, every rumor coming out of Ashburn worth paying attention to. And with that, we're closing out today, fam. Look at everything we've got on the table. A $2 million running back who could end up being the quietest heist in the whole NFL in 2026. A safety who could become the tactical heartbeat of a completely redesigned defense. And 2 players born out of that same system change, each fighting in their own way to earn a permanent spot on this roster. This franchise has been building its identity piece by piece. And what we're watching this summer isn't meaningless offseason noise. It's the real foundation of what could be a special season. Adam Peters keeps finding value where nobody else is looking, and Durante Jones is putting together a defensive puzzle we haven't even seen the full picture of yet. I genuinely believe this roster has hidden pieces that are going to surprise the entire NFC East once September hits. And the stories I brought you today are proof of that. Raise hail always. If this video gave you something, drop that like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments. Out of these 4 players, which one do you think surprises the most in 2026? I want to read every single answer. See y'all in the next one.